Hey everyone, MTast here, and I wanted to talk about a mistake that a lot of people are making or they might not know is happening. In some cases, you can hurt your damage by 15, 20, maybe even 30% depending on the character that you're using. But there are multiple ways to buff your damage in this game. But did you know that some of these buffs could actually bring your damage down? That sounds weird. It might not make a lot of sense, but I want to go over a couple of common things and a common problem that certain characters bring. Bennett is an amazing support, but if you have max Constellation, he could actually hurt your damage. Not on everyone, but there are some situations. Xiangyun, very cool as well. What if I told you that Xiangyun and Razor is one of the worst combinations in the game? Why? Let's get into it. Now, Xiangyun and Bennett with Diluc is an unbelievably good combo, but Xiangyun and Razor will tank your DPS. Now, you'll still hit hard. If you build for it, you'll still hit hard. But how could it be that Xiangyun with Diluc is incredible, but Xiangyun and Razor, both level 80, both geared out, both great weapons, could be terrible? Well, it's all in the wording, and with the passives within his Constellation and his skilled abilities. The same thing goes with Bennett, and I wanted to talk about this because I think it's really important. If you watch a build guide on Bennett and why he's so good, but you don't get into the nitty-gritty details, if you don't look at the constellations, you might be hurting yourself in some situations. I think Xiangyun is a much worse offender of this because, for him, it happens much sooner than Bennett. In the case of Bennett, he only can neuter your team's DPS if you have a maxed Constellation, which 95% of people won't have. But if you do have a maxed Constellation Bennett, there's something you need to look out for so that you don't hurt your team's overall damage. Let's get started. Now, in the case of Xiangyun, all of his constellations are great. This one even gives you 15% cooldown on your abilities. There are no problems in his constellation that are going to ruin your DPS. If you look at his talents, even with this steady breathing, this is one of the best buffs in the game. When you use your Spirit Blade, you've got an area of effect, and anyone who's using a sword, claymore, or polearm is going to get 8% attack speed. That's great. Attack speed is one of the best buffs in the game. The problem lies here with this Spirit Blade AoE. When these claymore, sword, and polearm users are within the AoE, their attacks are converted to cryo damage, and this is where the big problem hits. Now, you can make this extremely powerful in the case of Diluc, or you can, unfortunately, neuter your DPS in the case of Razor. Now, in the case of Razor, if you look at his attributes, built into his kit, he gets physical damage. He gets a physical damage bonus of 22.5% at level 80, what I'm at right now. Now, if I had a physical damage cup, I could get this all the way up to like 50%. And that's where the big problem is because my most damage is coming from white damage, the basic attack when you're attacking. Even when you pop your ultimate, most of the damage are white numbers. Now, if you use Xiangyun's E ability, it now is converted into cryo damage. So I'm going to get a bonus of 15% cryo damage, but I'm going to lose 50% of the physical damage. It's not going to exist anymore on this character. And so this would actually tank my DPS very heavily. Now, typically, when you use an electric attack and a cryo attack, you superconduct an enemy, and it reduces their physical defense, the strongest thing for Razor to apply. But unfortunately, because you're using Xiangyun, you are now doing cryo damage. So even though you've reduced their defenses, it doesn't matter. On top of this, if you had a constellation like this bad boy, where enemies' defenses are decreased by 15%, I believe this is the exact same thing. So you just wouldn't get the benefit of this, because you are now doing cryo damage, not physical, which sucks. So, we're going to run up, and we're going to melee. It's a little bit hard to look at the numbers. I am going to superconduct this guy, but you'll get an idea of the damage overall. So if I was to basic attack him, try to ignore the purple numbers. I crit there, 800, 1,000, 1,400, okay? So we're doing 1,000, 866. We're in that realm. Now, if we use Xiangyun, and we were to hit him with that, and then we basic attack, we're doing 700, 600, 800. All right, we got a little crit there, 1,500. But my attacks are now 600 and 700. it doesn't seem like a big deal here. I don't have as many artifacts on as I don't have any artifacts on. But we're looking at like a 20% reduction in damage on some of these hits. And that's a problem. Because a 20% reduction is the make or break between getting 3 stars in the Spiral Abyss, or beating the Spiral Abyss, and not. And the higher your damage and the more physical damage you have, the worse this is going to be. Now, in the case of Bennett and his fantastic voyage, he's just going to be cracked, he's going to help you out, he's going to give you a bunch of his attack damage, and you are going to hit harder. But you're not going to hit as hard as you could have, especially if you're on someone like Razor. But this only comes into effect if you have Constellations. Now, if you have Constellation 5, and Razor is your main DPS, even if you get Constellation 6, I wouldn't take it, because it then converts your damage into Pyro, and the exact same thing is going to happen. You are going to do some additional damage as Pyro damage, but all of your physical damage is going to be removed, making you useless. If you've superconducted an enemy, it's not going to apply. And so you need to be very careful on how you're building your characters, because depending on who you're using, this could actually bring your damage down. But what about amping your damage and making it stronger? Xiangyun isn't terrible, he's just terrible with certain characters. If you look at Xiangling and you look at something like the Crescent Spear that's giving physical damage, right? She's scaling off physical damage with her spear, you'd be really impacting her ability to do damage there, right? Razor, he's got it built into his kit. He's not going to be good with Xiangyun. With someone like D-Luke? Absolutely insanity. And I want to show you that. Now, in the case of D-Luke, he's not affected because we have multiple ways of applying pyro damage and getting that bonus. And so even though his attacks are being turned cryo, we turn them back into pyro. And because of this, we can actually alternate attacks and get a lot of melt, but on top of this, you're essentially just getting a free attack speed buff and you don't have to worry. So we're going to show this off now. The idea here is D-Luke is just going to get more attack speed, and he's going to get the bonus of being able to melt with no major penalty, especially if he uses his Q ability and turns everything to Pyro. He doesn't have to worry about any of these elemental changes. There's maybe a fractional DPS loss, but at this point, in this form, he would be doing Pyro damage the entire time. And so there's no real risk there. And so if you have an enemy that has an electric shield maybe, and you're trying to use D-Luke, that's no problem. You can use Xiangyun with him. Just don't use Razor and neuter his overall DPS. Now, in the case of Bennett and D-Luke, we're just going to amplify his damage even further, getting an additional Pyro damage, and with my normal attacks now doing Pyro damage, D-Luke is just going to hit even harder because he doesn't have any downtime on that Pyro damage. Now, if you're fighting a Pyro enemy, obviously, it's going to be trash. But if you are fighting an enemy that might be weak to Pyro damage, I am now buffing it further and making every attack fire, no matter if I've used my ult, no matter if I have my E. So obviously, this is going to be amazing on D-Luke. But again, if you're using someone like Razor, if you're using Xiangling to auto-attack, this is going to be a problem. It's just something to think about when you're building your characters so that you don't throw away damage and buffs that you've been building towards, right? Now, I'm just doing fire damage with every single attack. So this is great. This is fantastic. In fact, I could actually put both of these here, and I can alternate damage, which is pretty nuts. So, you know, there's some fun interactions here. Just make sure that you're paying attention to what's going on with your character's overall stats. You know, the same thing happens with Kaching just on a base level. If you build for electro damage, but you don't have your E ability up or you're not using your Q, your damage is going to be lower. But if you build for physical damage, and then you use your E ability, you're going to neuter your damage on yourself just by using your ability. And so it's interesting that these interactions happen. It can lead to some high DPS boosts. It's amazing, but you really need to pay attention to when an elemental ability is being applied, right? If you look at your character here, if you look at your attributes, in this case, I do have electro damage bonus. So realistically, if I am using Kaching, I would want to use her E ability and have it up all the time to maximize that electro damage. There is almost no time where I would want to basic attack without her E ability procced and doing that damage. So even if you aren't necessarily using D-Luke, maybe you're not using Razor, maybe you're not using Bennett, there might be somewhere in your build where you're changing the element of your attacks and it's going to make you weaker, not stronger. And I just wanted to make sure that people know about this. I think it's a pretty common thing. I think most people understand this. But if this is something that changed your life, make sure to like the video. Make sure to comment and say, thanks, Mikey. And I hope that helped at least one of you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you soon, my friends. Bye-bye.